Welcome back to the daily Living Jewish History class. We go through some basic laws about keeping kosher. We spoke about blood and avoiding it. Then we spoke about milk and meat over the last few days. We've spoken about how the prohibition is not to eat it, not to mix it, not to benefit from it. See, there's a typo. We spoke about two people eating at the same table, milk and meat. There should be a hecker, a reminder that they don't mix. We spoke about bread and salt not being used for milk and meat if it might become have some crumbs of meat or milk on it. We spoke about having separate dishes, and we'll speak more about that in a moment. And most recently, we spoke about, in the context of having separate dishes, that if somebody accidentally used a knife to cut an onion, a meat knife, and then you wanted to put the onion into something milky. So let's say you were frying eggs, and so you were chopping up some onions to put in your fried egg. And in your fried egg, maybe you're also going to put some cheese. And the knife that you used to chop the almonds was a meat knife. So that's a problem, because since onions are sharp, they are going to extract a meaty taste out of the onion, out of the knife. And then when that onion gets mixed with milk, it will be a mixture of milk and meat. So if that does happen, if you've just chopped up a whole lot of onions using a meat knife, you should consult a rabbi to see whether there is a solution. But for that reason, some people keep a parov knife, just a parov knife. Generally, parov is something that's not used for milk and not used for meat. So why do they keep a parov knife? That way, if you're wanting to cut up a salad, and in that salad are onions, and you want to eat that salad or mix that salad both with milk and meat, so by using a parov knife to cut up those onions, then there's no concern of the onions extracting a milky taste or meaty taste into that salad, and then you'd be able to use that very same salad both with milk foods and meat foods. So that is a suggestion. Otherwise, if you cut the onions up with a milky knife, then you shouldn't be eating that salad with meat foods and vice versa. So that's something that maybe people don't know. If you do have a parov knife, then you would need to wash it. You wouldn't be able to put it into the dishwasher. And then you would need to wash it by hand with not too hot water. As long as it's only warm water and you just wash it by hand, it's a knife, so it should be fairly simple. Then you just have it in its own space. So now we move on to if you make a meat dish using a milk substitute made from almonds, if you used almond milk, Almond Breeze, I think they call it today, the company that does it. So you should leave whole almonds in it in order to avoid the appearance of wrongdoing. So we spoke yesterday about the concept, or previous days, about Maris Ayin. You don't want to appear to the public as to be sinning. You don't want to be implying that you're doing something that the Torah prohibits. So if you're going to have a cup of milk, then for people that are watching you, if you're going to go there and have your cup of coffee with milk together with while you're busy eating a schnitzel or meat for supper, so it's going to appear to people like you're mixing milk and meat. So in order to prevent people from thinking that you're mixing milk and meat, the Shulchan Aruch says that you should actually have some almonds on the table so people know that it's not real milk, it's almond milk. In modern terms, it means that you should keep the bottle on the table. So if you have soy milk, rice milk, Almond Breeze, and you're having that together with meat, then as long as you have the bottle on the table and people see that it's not cow's milk, then nobody is going to think that you're doing the wrong thing. Otherwise, it is a problem. I did hear from one of my teachers when I was learning smicha that nowadays soya milk or non-dairy milk has become so popular that it could be that you don't even need that sign. Today, there's almost as much a likelihood when you see a cup of milk of it being milk as of it being something else. So people are no longer going to suspect that you're mixing milk and meat, because it's as common to have non-dairy milk as dairy milk. Now, maybe this I heard about 10 years ago. I know at some point there was a big movement to stay away from cow's milk. It's very unhealthy. And people were very into soy milk and others. I know since then, I think there was a bit of a turnaround. I think now people are more okay with cow's milk and more concerned about soy milk in particular. Certainly, I'm no expert in this. You can speak to your dietitian, but still today, yeah, I would say if you're serving almond milk or whatever it is, rice milk together with your meat meal, then certainly it's better to have the bottle on the table so people don't suspect you of not keeping kosher. But if you don't, it wouldn't be I don't think it would be a halachic problem, since having non-dairy milk is so prevalent in today's lifestyles. On the other hand, if you had real milk and you had soya meat, like you have those soya salamis. So, I mean, if it looks different, which I think it does look quite different. I mean, I remember we had a bar of soya salami in the fridge, and it looked like it's a very different color. But maybe that's because we don't usually have usual salami. But either way, if it looks distinctly different, that's fine. But if not, then if you have a soya burger and it looks like it's meat or it looks like it's chicken, and you serving it together with your dairy meal, then again, you should have the box or something on the table. I know those soya sausages, soya polonis. If it looks like it's meat, you should have the box on the table so people know that it's not real, so they don't suspect you of mixing milk and meat. So that's quite an important one. Okay, here's an interesting one. It is the accepted custom, and this is brought in halacha, in Jewish law, so it's already more than just a custom, not to kosher dairy utensils in order to use them with meat, or vice versa. So this is a practical question. If somebody has a really nice pot and they use it for dairy, and they want to instead use it for meat. So, I mean, if you're able to even take a non-kosher pot and kosher it, so surely you'd be able to take a dairy pot, which is kosher, and kosher it so that you can use it for meat. So let me just explain how koshering works. Earlier I described how if you cook up a pot of milk, then even after you wash out the milk from the pot itself absorbs the taste of the milk within its walls. And were a person to then take that same pot and cook some hot dogs, then the taste would come out of the walls of the pot and go into the hot dogs. And that would be obviously forbidden. It's mixing milk and meat. However, once a person koshers a pot, so what the koshering process does is it purges any tastes from the walls of the pot. So when you have your dishes koshered and it's put into a boiling hot pot, that larger big hot pot basically removes any previous tastes. So in theory, there would be nothing wrong with taking a pot that was used to cook milk, koshering it, and then using it to cook up some hot dogs. However, the custom is that we don't kosher from milk to meat or vice versa. And I think the obvious reason for that is because then a person might forget which one it is. If one day you're using it for milk and then you kosher it, because remember, it used to be common for people to also kosher dishes by themselves. They wouldn't need to call in a kosher expert. So if one day you're using the pot for milk and then the next day you're using it to cook up some chicken, and then you're koshering it in between, you might forget that you've koshered it in between. You may forget what you've used it for at last, and then you'll still come to mixing milk and meat. So practically speaking, unfortunately, if you have a milk set of dishes or utensils, then you cannot make them into a meat set. You would rather need to just keep them for whatever they are. Okay. Now we move on to a new discussion, and that is seals. Did I spell that correctly? I think I didn't. How do you spell seal? Is it like that? Yes? Okay, good. So here's an interesting discussion, and that is the sages instituted as a safeguard in order to ensure that people don't come to eat non-kosher, that certain foods if they are left in the hands of somebody that doesn't keep kosher, or somebody that's a non-Jew, then specifically with a non-Jew is a primary concern. We worry that the non-Jew might say that, wow, that looks really good, and I'll just make a switch. My food looks identical. And the Jew won't know, it'll come to eat non-kosher. I remember as a child hearing a story of somebody on an airplane. I'd love to verify it, but it certainly could have happened. They got their kosher meal, and if you'll know, when you order a kosher meal on the plane, it always comes, the meat or the fish part of it always comes, in general, the whole thing is sealed, and especially the meat or the fish, or whatever it is, that main dish, it has a double seal. It's wrapped, and on top of that is a seal from the kashrus agency. So this person received their kosher meal, and they opened it all up. So they opened up the silver foil and the seal, and they're ready to eat. And then they wanted to go somewhere. Maybe they needed to use the washroom. And they came back and they realized, actually this food has just become not kosher. It's become not kosher because the rabbis instituted that any meat that is left unsupervised is deemed not kosher because it may have been substituted for other chicken or meat. Anyhow, the person started thinking, okay, this is like ridiculous. I'm on the plane now. It's not exactly like I could just go and buy another one. What are the chances? And I'm sure it's fine. He's having this inner battle. It must be fine. On the other hand, he's saying to himself, but that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. That's what the Torah says, that I got to be a good Jew and keep to that. And he's going up and down, and thank God he wins the battle, and he decides he's not going to eat it. Anyhow, the person that's sitting right next to him, so maybe he notices, this guy seems a little schizophrenia. He's opened up his whole meal, and he's not eating, and he sees everything okay. And everything's okay. Like, what happened? He told you, I know it will sound crazy to you, but so there's a law that's once we leave food exposed without any seals, then we can't eat it. So the guy sitting next to him on the plane says, I'll tell you the honest truth. I've always wanted to know what kosher food tastes like. I've always seen kosher. I've never in my life known what kosher. I've never actually tasted it in my life. So I thought, here's a kosher meal right next to me. I'll take out one of the pieces. I'll substitute it. What do you know? It's just a meal you got on the plane. You would never know the difference. And that way I'll get to taste kosher food. So that's the story that I heard. So this law certainly protected the guy. So that's what we learn about in the next few halachos. The rabbis instituted that certain foods, if left unsupervised, become, by rabbinic decree, become not kosher, which is why it's very important for it to have a seal, which is why since they heat up on the plane, since they heat up the actual protein, so that's why it has its own seal. If it was just sealed together with the whole bag, which is plastic, then when they would want to take it out to put it in the oven and bring it back to you, it would become not kosher because it was out of your supervision and it was left unsealed. So that's why there's an independent seal on the actual meal that's going to be heated up. That way, even when it leaves you, it still has its own seal, and then they heat it up and then they bring it back to you, and you can go ahead and eat it. So that's quite an interesting one. And we'll see there's a distinction between whether it's a food that we're concerned about it being a biblical violation or a rabbinic violation. So in other words, if it's something like meat, where you can have a kosher piece of lamb and a non-kosher piece of lamb, and they could look almost identical. I mean, the real mavens say that you could see the difference or taste the difference, but certainly for the guy on the street, they're both cow's meat, they both, whatever it is, or they both lamb, he's not going to know that the one animal was slaughtered by a sheikhet and that the other one was shot. I mean, it's both the same part of the animal, possibly, but looks almost identical. They say that kosher meat needs to be salted. They use salt to extract the blood. So I've heard it being said that once the meat gets salted, then it may look a little different. So again, maybe that's for the mavens, but the simpleton amongst us, we wouldn't know the difference. So any meat that's left unattended becomes not kosher unless you can recognize that particular piece of meat. So I had an instance when I was living across the street from my parents that my mother sent me supper. she sent me a plate of chicken. Now it's next door, but the law is the law. So I got the plate of chicken. It was just from my mother, so there wasn't any seal, but she sent it over with the domestic, whoever was assisting us. So if that's the law is the law, then it meant that by the time the chicken moved across the street into our house, it became by rabbinic law not kosher. So I called up a rabbi, and luckily he said that if my mother can recognize these particular pieces of chicken because she just cooked it up, then that's fine. So had she just asked maybe her domestic to prepare the chicken and make it, then she probably wouldn't be able to recognize it. But since my mother had made the chicken herself, I sent her a photo of the plate that I received, and she says, yes, I could recognize that. So once the person can recognize that this is the very same piece, then that's fine. But if you can't recognize that it's the same piece, so back to the plate scenario, if the person before he went to use the washroom or whatever it was, after opening the seal, took a good examination at his meat dish and really became familiar with it, and then when he came back, he'd be able to see whether it was the same piece or not, then that would be fine as well. But if a person that wouldn't be able to recognize it, it's no good. So practically speaking, that what that also means is kosher butcheries are not allowed to, by Torah law, are not allowed to make deliveries without first sealing the meat. It's not just a matter of for somebody who wants to be extra sure. Rather, if you receive a dish from Moshe's and for whatever reason it's a meat dish, it's whatever it is, chicken, and there is no seal on it, it's just a regular aluminium metal pan, even though the truck says it's Moshe's and all, then you'd have to call up a rabbi, and possibly it would be not kosher because it was left outside the supervision of a Jew, somebody who keeps kosher without a seal. So that's quite an interesting one as far as seals. Please God, tomorrow we'll get into more detail. Yeah, make sure that you keep yourself in check, not just what you eat, but also what you say. Well, not only what goes in the mouth,